of of presentation rooms, this would clearly would win the prize. This verdant wall over here, a beautiful sunset. This is unbelievable. So I'm here to talk to you about the work that we did porting Moss to 4 different VR platforms. My name is Brendan Walker. I'm an engineer at Polyarc. And a little bit about Polyarc first. So we're a really small indie studio here in Seattle, 15 people, 16 people now actually. And we're trying to focus on small, polished VR experiences. Over the last 2 years, we've given a number of talks about Moss. So this one, for me, is kind of a collection of loose ends of interesting topics that have come in porting rather than any one specific deep dive into an area. My coworker and I actually gave a talk at XRDC 2018 called VR Interaction Design. And in that same presentation room before ours, another VR dev, who shall remain nameless, started their talk by saying, anyone giving a VR talk, best practices talk, doesn't know what they're talking about. So imagine how silly I felt leading on with the 4 C's of good VR interaction design. Thanks a lot, How to Deliver Great TED Talk, for that alliterative 4C suggestion. So, rather than give you a specific set of guidelines for good VR design, I'm going to tell you about a bunch of stuff we encountered in the process and tips that may be helpful. And if not helpful, I hope they're at least entertaining. So specifically, I wanted to talk about some of the things we learned trying to port to PSVR, the Oculus Rift, the Vive, and most recently the Oculus Quest, which initially we had no idea about, and are actively in the middle of porting to you right now. So back when we started developing Moss in 2016, we wanted to play it safe because we knew the market was small. And ideally, we wanted to launch on as many platforms as possible because we knew the market was too small to try to be exclusive. But we knew we just didn't have the capacity to launch all at once. And so we had to take a guess at what we thought was going to be the largest initial market and then go from there. So that first platform, of course, was the PSVR. If you're not familiar with it, it's an add-on for the PS4 console that has a 6-degree of freedom tracked headset and 2 different options for tracking your hands. One of these tracked solutions is the PlayStation Move controller. And this initially is what we thought we were going to be using for the game. The idea is we have this puzzle diorama game, you're reaching in and interacting stuff with one hand, and then you have another hand to navigate around a small mouse character in the environment. The PlayStation Move controller has this glowing ball at the end of it, and that's where it gets the positional tracking from with the camera. And then internally it has an IMU that lets you get the orientation of the controller. So you get pretty reasonable tracking data from it, with some reasonable bounds. We also, because I mentioned we wanted to control this third-person character, there was this other really weird controller that existed on the PlayStation 3 called the Navi. I don't know if any of you have seen this one before. It's kind of like half of a Dualshock 3 controller. It's got a thumbstick and some buttons. It's not positionally tracked at all, though. And so when we were first demoing the Moss to Sony to pitch it to them, we actually demoed this, and they're like, "Where did you guys get this?" And we're like, "Off Amazon?" And we're not supporting that anymore. It's like, all right, well, that's out. But we did, at the time, like the idea of having one hand for positional tracking and one hand for navigation. It turns out, though, in retrospect, this would have been bad because one of the trade-offs you make with the Navi is that when you want to press one of the buttons on the controller, you have to take your hand off the thumbstick. And so for moments of intense combat, that actually would have felt kind of bad. So what did that leave? Well, the other tracked option is the Dualshock 4. It is standard gamepad, but it has this light bar on the front, which can be used for positional tracking within some constraints. And then internally, the same IMU that gives you the orientation of the controller. So we had many years of experience developing for third-person games. I myself came from Bungie and was there for 6 years working on Destiny, and before that Halo Reach. So we had a lot of experience trying to control a character from third person on a controller. And so we felt like applying those lessons to this 6-DoF controlled thing felt like a very natural extension for us. However, when you play a PSVR game with the Dualshock 4, there's a couple of really big problems you have to worry about regarding hand posture. So, as I mentioned before, you only get tracking data from this front light bar. It means that this stereo camera that's watching this controller has to see this light bar. And it's very easy to accidentally block this. Even in ideal conditions, if you're moving your body from side to side, once you're out beyond about 60 degrees, you can lose tracking of this thing. Separately, you get some weirdos that like to hold the controller like this and block the edges with their fingers. So to remind people, like, please pull your fingers back, hold the controller like a normal person. And separately, you may say, like, well, my battery's low, I want to leave it plugged in. Normally a very reasonable thing to do, but when you hold the control in certain angles, that cable will now occlude part of that light bar. So you have to remind people at the beginning, please unplug the thing. And if you don't have a charged controller, I'm sorry, you shouldn't play the game right now, like if you charge. So, given that you have this constrained tracking point, there's kind of this sweet spot for tracking. You want to be reasonably close to the camera, so you get like good resolution light bar, but not so far away. Oh yeah, but the closer you get, of course, you're kind of getting near the frustum of the camera. And so your lateral tracking distance is kind of low. If you get further back, you have better lateral tracking, but now the image of the light bar is smaller, and so that gets more noisy. So there's kind of this sweet zone for tracking with the controller between about 4 and 5 feet. And so what that effectively gives you is, if you're using the Dualshock 4, about a cubic meter of space to work with. And so what we ended up doing was kind of developing this standard diorama box. This is a puzzle interaction game. You're reaching into this diorama. The world can be much bigger than this space, but the stuff that we expect you to interact with was in this standardized volume that was about 160 centimeters wide, 80 centimeters tall, 80 centimeters deep. And kind of a fun fact in developing this size, originally we didn't have this. We were just kind of playing it like this doesn't feel right, and then we said we need to like come up with a standard for it. And the size of this volume ended up actually being the exact same size as the playmat for the board game Dust Tactics, which is a board game we've been playing in the office. And I'm like, oh, board games have already figured this out. They know it's a comfortable reach distance in there, and we just need to copy that. So that was kind of cool. You'll also notice some coloration on that. So that green region sort of is like, this is a comfortable holding distance. As you get into the red, it gets a little bit more uncomfortable. It's still valid, but so we generally try to keep like puzzle interactions within that volume. Similar to the positional constraints, we were also worried about head comfort. If we were asking somebody to turn their head, you're sitting on the couch playing this game, or maybe standing up sometimes, but if you're having to turn laterally, if you're asking you to do a lot of looking at the environment with your head off to the side, it's going to get uncomfortable after a while. And so we tried to also put these angular constraints attached to the camera, so don't ask the user to lean farther than 60 degrees. And this was good for making it comfortable. One thing I actually do regret about having this constraint is I think it made us too nervous to put stuff outside of it often. And that kind of ruins some of the magic of VR. You can look anywhere, right? You don't have to look straight forward. And so it is good to encourage people to do stuff. And there's some other games like Astrobot, which I'm going to refer to in a couple of points in this talk, that do, I think, a better job of that. So it's good to have constraints, and it's good to know when to subvert those constraints. So with all the tracking constraints out of the way, let's move on to some interesting notes about how we do testing, and how we did testing in VR. So I'm probably preaching to the choir here for anybody who's done any kind of playtesting in VR, but forcing ourselves to start early playtesting is super important. And that's really easy to say, but it's also hard, because often when you're starting early, you're in gray box, right? And like, it's sometimes hard to get somebody who has never seen your game or has any concept of that to like understand what you're trying to do. And so you can get feedback, but it might not necessarily be always useful. And so you're trying, it's a struggle to know like when's that right moment to say, when should I start bringing somebody in and getting playset notes and trying to file down that rough edge. And so for us, we found that when you're kind of in that early, like you spend a third of your development phase, whatever that is, your milestone, your project, trying to figure out yourself. That second third, you should be having all your peers at work who haven't seen your game or your level trying it. And then once you kind of feel like you're at a pretty good spot, at that your last third should be when you bring in people, and then putting those post-it notes up about like all the little rough edges. And sometimes you're like, well, I don't want to over-index on this one piece of feedback. Let's see if we keep getting the same thing again and again. And doing that really tight iterative cycle. But this is like, it's super important to be thinking about this constantly and not right near the end. And of course I say that and we totally break that anyway, we run out of time or whatever. But that's kind of the aspirational goal. And this was very, very important for us early on, all throughout the development of Mouse. As another practical matter on the PS4, especially if you're an indie dev, if you're an indie dev, you don't have dev kits raining down on you. You have like 2 or 3 in your office if you're lucky. And so you have to share them amongst your peers. And this can be kind of a hassle if there's a lot of cableage. On the PlayStation 4 dev kit, you've got 2 Ethernet cables coming out of the thing, one for debugging, one for communicating over the network normally. And so trying to make this convenient to move around is really important. So we actually found these really cheap $45 tool carts from Harbor Freight Tools, and then a really cheap $30 tripod from Amazon for the camera up there. And so it's made this really easy to cart around these dev kits to people's stations if we needed to. Later on, we were fortunate to get some more dev kits, and near the end, basically everyone had one, but early on, this was super important. Separately, when you're doing play tests with external people, you don't technically need a monitor on this. You can just have the headset, which is fine if you're testing at your desk, but you need to be able to see what your playtester's doing. So it's good to leave like a permanent TV or a monitor in whatever your playtest room is going to be, and then you can cart this into it and hook it all up to it. One other thing that was super important to us, it's sort of like you're always going to need some kind of debugging tools, either for cheats or saving a crash dump or whatever. And it's easy to just hook this all up to the debug console. We're Unreal Studio, so Unreal has a built-in debug console you can use. But it's a real pain in the butt to use the debug console in VR. So we actually put a little debug menu that popped up on your hand. You could click the thumbstick and this menu would show up and you could scroll through. And we had a bunch of really common debug commands like teleport the character. And it's often the case in playtesting, somebody would get the character in a spot you didn't intend. So just no, go over here and you point and they teleport Quill to the red spot. Sorry, I introduce Quill as the mouse character in the game. If the game's got or the level got in a broke state, you'd say, I want to do a restart level, that sort of thing. And we later on, originally we just had one single list, but we ended up extending this to being a complete like multi-level menu with tons of options for like going to a room or trying to debug settings. Super useful on the Quest. I'll get to that later. So the other thing that was super handy about jumping to every room was automated perf testing. So Unreal has a simple framework for doing automated tests. You can write little automated actions in C++. And we had one said, go to every single room of the game and then play back this recording to me doing this wild motion. My head would just do that. And so play that motion. And then would record in that 10-second span how long, what percentage of the time it was under target frame rate, which on PS4 was 60 FPS for us. Which I know sounds kind of low for VR, but it worked in a seated game for PSVR. I had to go higher than that on PC. And then after it was done running through that automated suite, we'd get this sorted list of like, hey, this is your worst room to your best room, and we'd just post that to Slack. If you're not familiar with Slack, it's just a team communication tool. And so this is not going to catch every weird perf edge case, right? But it was a good smoke detector. It was good to like, hey, look, like if you sort them top down, like this room is bad, and this is where you should be focusing our energy first. And as stuff got better, you'd start seeing rooms improve, and then suddenly somebody made a change, like, hey, what the hell? You know, Village Room 050 now is at the top of the list, and that was fixed the other day. What did you do? And it made it easier to like have that. So having that regular cadence was super, super helpful for us. So speaking of perf issues, I want to talk about blocking loads. It's one of those things you can kind of forgive in a 2D game, but at least on PlayStation, it can be an issue because depending on where your tracking data is getting updated, you can run into issues where as you turn your head, there's this thing called reprojection. It's like, hey, we're a little late on a frame, so just sort of slightly tilt the previous frame that was there. But if you have a blocking load that's happening at the wrong time, you're going to end up blowing way past that. So here you can see that weird, there's like a fade to white, you'll see it pop back up again. I'm like swinging my head back and forth violently. And that's kind of the weird edge reprojection there. So we got dinged insert, we had a bug where we were doing a blocking load at the wrong time. So you have two ways to deal with this. One is say, well, we just need to make loading of game assets take place asynchronous in the background all the time, which can be hard. And the other is, if you're going to need to do a blocking load, just like fade all the way to black and then stay there and then do it. And this is tricky sometimes, but it's the reality you have to deal with on any system where you're doing these blocking loads. So speaking of Sony VRC, VRC is their virtual reality certification. And this is different than the final TRC, the test pass that the platform does. This hopefully takes, you get to decide when you want to do this, but it should be hopefully well before you ship. And it's there for them to help you come across like any issues they think are going to be problematic for you shipping your game that make people uncomfortable, if you have some motion issues, other things. One issue we got called out on in that was this problem with our pause menu. So the frame of the menu was designed to render over top of everything. We wanted to look like it was in-world, but you had this depth conflict here where it looked like, from the viewed in the game, that frame should actually be behind the desk. We want to render on top of it, so your brain gets confused because you're like getting mixed messages about what's supposed to be going on here. And so they flagged this. And so the practical case of that was we just had to make sure, like, we have this menu UI that it always popped up in a good spot in the game, and making adjustments to the size of the menu. Another issue that cropped up, and this is a case on any VR headset that has an OLED display. It turns out the pixels, if they're pure black, and then you want them to go to any non-black color, it takes slightly longer than going from one color to another. And so that manifests, if you shift your head back and forth, if you're looking at a really dark patch, you get this black bleeding that smears across the screen. And sometimes it's not a big deal if it's like on the periphery, but if it's like in the middle, like this, it can actually make you really sick. It feels like you have like a blurry vision. It feels terrible. This wasn't intended to be shipping content, this is actually a bug. But you just have to be really careful about having really deep deep lacks in some of your content, and something we struggled with because we had a lot of these dioramas that we wanted to have vignetted with a nice black background or whatever. You need to be very careful making that like a smooth, transition. Okay, so you've gotten through studying VRC and you've gotten through certification. What other platform things should you consider about on PS4? It's kind of a fun screenshot, actually. This is like the day before we're about to go live. You get to set the timer for when it actually launches officially. So it's cool to come home and see that. It's like, yes, I just did that an hour ago. So believe it or not, trophies are a really big deal on PS4. People love getting a platinum. Platinum is when you get all the trophies for your game. We originally weren't going to add them at all, so like whatever, a VR game, who cares? But there's another famous YouTube streamer in Game Over Greg Place, like, so many of you guys going to add those plats. I'm like, what? What's a plat? He's like, oh, it's this big deal. You should look into it. So this is probably about a year after our game shipped. That top one, that together were twofold, is the trophy. You can see that 16% of the people played through our entire game, got all the trophies. And one of those trophies is a deathless run through the game, which is hard. And that really surprised me. I'm used to hearing, like, in single-player games, like 10% of the people play through your whole game or whatever. So I was like, holy crap. Like, that's, for me, I don't know how you feel about that, but I saw that number and I was like, that's amazing. So people really care. And I don't want to, like, it's like, oh, it's because Moss is awesome. It's like, no, people just freaking love trophies on PS4. So if you're shipping, like, really consider that. This is different, I think, on PC. But it's really something you should seriously consider looking into. One important note, though, about publishing trophies. That be careful when you publish the trophy data. I made the mistake, and this is a Slack conversation with my wife. I didn't realize the publishing date was not like internal, and so I accidentally published our trophies about a week too early with a bunch of like debug images in it. And then I get a Slack message out saying like, hey, I just saw on Twitter that you guys put out the trophies, and they're all broken. I'm like, what? I'm like, oh god, I didn't realize what that did. So be really careful with that publishing button. It's funny being in, you get to make these mistakes. One thing that's super cool after launch is watch people play your game on Twitch. It's amazing for a number of reasons. It's kind of cool to watch people play your game, period. But because it's a VR game, you can see where people are looking. And that's really cool in a puzzle game because you can see what they're paying attention to or what they're not paying attention to. And so you get a lot of really cool usability data with that. And you also get this other funny subversion. You hear this old adage, well, you can't ship the dev with the game, but in Twitch you kind of can. At some point, I've seen a number of issues where somebody had like placed their PlayStation camera too far back on their desk. I'm like, oh, my hand tracking really sucks. And so they sign on us and like, hey, maybe you should move your camera further forward. And you shouldn't do that, but you can do that. and if the person's a tastemaker, it might behoove you to do that. So, not my officially sanctioned advice, but think about it. However, while you're watching people play, you're going to watch your game break in a number of spectacular ways. PS4 has a number of failure modes because it's an optically tracked thing. Lighting, your environment throws up a ton of stuff. So highly, highly, highly recommend making a troubleshooting page. This makes tech support easy because you're going to get lots of emails, and if you're a small team, you just don't have time to respond in depth to every one of them. And often people are hitting the same sets of things over and over again. So if you can refer them to a web page, say, look, here's you have reflective, glass in front of your thing. Oh, your camera's too far back. Whatever. Like, have this page. And please, by the way, if you're shipping a game, steal our page. Like, pull these things off. It's totally worth your time to set this up and have all this information for people. And I'm sad that I don't see this often enough because I see people troubleshooting this stuff on Reddit, and you don't need to do that. It's not that hard to provide this. As an indie dev, doing a VR game, there's an indie dev period. There's always this question of, should I bother making a physical disc? People say, like, I want a collectible thing. I totally understand that. But you have to be really careful as an indie dev because the return on physical goods is hilariously bad. And it's not because anybody's being greedy along the process. It's just that the supply chain of getting a disc onto shelves involves way more people than digital distribution. And I would love to give specific numbers about this, but I don't feel comfortable doing that, A, because I'm on camera. And be honest, I'm not the person who managed the contracts for that, so I would be worried I gave the wrong one anyway. But it's something that, I would say you shouldn't do it, but your mileage will definitely vary on it, and you really want to spend some time thinking about it. Like, for example, hey, if I have a bunch of used copies of my game, will that eat into my digital sales? You should do some modeling for that. They may be fine, maybe not. Something to think about. But one thing that did work really well for us was box bundles. So I don't know how many of you guys saw this in Best Buy. We were super lucky and privileged to bundle with Astrobot, which is another huge PSVR title. And this was huge for us because the way the box bundles work, there's a digital code that was put in there, but Sony pre-bought a lot of those. So for an indie dev, it's huge. It's like something you just get a paycheck and you're done. That's amazing. And then we got a ton of visibility, and it was really great, and everyone loved the bundle. So and you don't get to do this right out of the gate, but it's something to think about, if you're trying to ship on a console platform. Speaking of shipping on consoles, one thing you have to worry about on PS4, make sure to save copies of every build. And it seems kind of obvious, but save copies of every build you upload, because when you're making a patch, you need those previous copies to make that delta. This isn't something you have to worry about on PC systems. I wish this was not the case on Sony, but it's easy to like, oh crap, where was the initial build we sent that we didn't make a patch now? I don't know where the hell we saved that on our file store. So like, have a system. It seems obvious, but we didn't have this initially, and we realized very soon, like, oh, we're going to need that. So last but not least on Sony, I want to talk about demoing the game. We were super lucky to get a chance to demo our game at the PlayStation Experience, which is this big fan event Sony sometimes does down in Anaheim. It was super amazing. So we got this booth. Well, I'm sorry about the image quality here. We forgot to take pictures, and so this is actually a screen cap from a random YouTuber who happened to be walking by our booth, so it's a little blurry. Sorry. But you'll see me in the background, and I don't know if you can tell, but I'm looking a little sad. Why do I look sad? Well, our headset and control tracking is garbage right now. Why is that? Well, there's two problems. Remember I mentioned this is an optically tracked thing. So we had these beautiful big banners that Sony had made for us and put behind us, and then it had these big bright floodlights on them that were completely drowning out the lights on the headset. So be really careful if you're demoing in a public space about the lighting. It says you have to pay attention to it. Make sure to do a test ahead of time. And we actually talked to the guys, the people, the union guys that are managing the station were awesome, and they helped us tune the lights down. So that fixed part of it, but we still are having issues. The other issue, again, sorry for the poor image quality, this thing I circled down at the bottom, that's this beautiful glowing case that holds the PS4 and showing the PS4 in front of this metal display stand. Well, communication to the DualShock 4 controller is done over Bluetooth. Bluetooth doesn't play nice if it has to go through metal. And this caused horrible interference. Since we were getting terrible tracking, we couldn't figure it out what was going on. We turned on the lighting, what's happening? We've never seen this before. Unfortunately, another dev, who also was running the same thing, figured it out. I was like, oh, hey, if I switch my PS4 to the other side of the display stand and have line of sight, it works fine. So that was 2 hours of needless suffering. Finally, last but not least, this is Knack. Knack is not to be trusted. He is a Sony mascot that was wandering the hall, and at some point in his playful nature decided to come up during one of our demos and shake the TV that had the camera on it and wave humorously in front of it. And I was sitting there standing like, what the hell are you doing? You're going to make this person sick, but he's like this official mascot, and we're here at Sony's best, so what do you do? So this guy's a jerk, so I established, make a knack-free zone in front of your booth. But all joking aside, don't put the tracking device, whatever it is, PlayStation or otherwise, on something that is close to the hallway, because people will bump it, people will get sick. And it's an easy mistake to make. You're like, hey, this convenient stand, that's nice height, I'll mount it to it. Don't do it, resist the urge. So that's about all I want to talk about on the PS4 side of things. I'm going to move on to the Vive. We were very fortunate, because we're a local Seattle indie dev, to get a couple of Vive dev kits really early on. And so this enabled us to start doing positional tracking before we had this homebrew solution that was super rough and get like really quality tracking. But it was kind of an interesting challenge, right? Because you'll notice on these controllers, there's no thumbstick there. We have a thumbstick game. But it's a trackpad, so you can emulate one. So I'll get into that in a second. So speaking of our early homebrew stuff, originally we had no official track controller setup. We had this homebrew thing that was a PlayStation 3i camera taped to the DK2 tracking camera, and then this open source software for trying to track it. And we had these big bay windows that were constantly flooding the room. They had to adjust the calibration for it. It was a nightmare. You had to align the tracking space of your controller and the headset. It was bad times. So we got that Vive dev kit, and suddenly we had clean quality tracking, and it was glorious. But there's some other new interesting problems. Most of them aren't an issue anymore, but there's a couple that you might still have to worry about with the Vive. So this was our initial floor plan. And one of the things you deal with when you first set up the Vive is like, oh, hey, cool, I just put a lighthouse in one corner of the room and a lighthouse in the other corner of the room, and you're tracking for the whole office. Well, kind of, right? Only up to about 5 meters. And our office was just uncomfortably beyond that region, so we had to split it up into 2 zones. And it turns out also, this zone over here, this metal filing cabinet, we had this funny thing where we were renting out the storage room for the neighboring office, and that was their filing cabinet, and they needed to get to that. But that metal filing cabinet was reflective, and it was really throwing off the tracking of the controller, so we had to tape cardboard in it, but then every time they wanted to come and go with their files, we'd rip the cardboard off and back on, which is great. Fortunately, Valve to their credit fixed that issue, but you still have this problem of like awkward room size, and so it's something you have to think about with lighthouses. And we just ended up having to say like, okay, well, only one half of the room gets on at a time, so we're doing a play test with the Vive. We turn that half on, turn it off on the other, and it was a bit of a hassle, but we made it work. However, you still do have to worry about infrared light. So when we were trying to raise money at Polyarc, we had set up shop in this little hotel room outside GDC, and we had a Vive dev kit and an Oculus dev kit on each half, and these beautiful bay windows. But when you opened up, it flooded the room with infrared light and completely threw off the tracking, so we had to close all the curtains for it. So it's kind of weird, like inviting investors in, there's like a bunch of nerds studying this guy in this dark hotel room. It's like, it's gonna be okay, it's legit. So we were talking about how do we deal with this thumbstick thing. So this is the official button mapping for MOS. The left trackpad is used as kind of a thumbstick, and then we break the right pad off into a jump and attack. Well, there's a couple really interesting challenges trying to make a thumbstick work on the trackpad. The first is that when you press your thumb down initially, like on a thumbstick, it's snap back to center, right? But if you say, like, well, I'm going to treat the center of the trackpad as the center of a thumbstick, when you first press, your character's going to start moving. And that's not what you expect. And say, oh, oops, that's not where I meant to go, and you correct. And of course, when you can't see your thumb, your initial placement's going to be wrong. And so that kind of sucks. So one way to get around this is you say, well, when I first put my thumb down, that's going to be the center. And then when I deviate away from that, that's where I do my thumbstick stuff. And of course, this only works to a certain range. If you go like way outside this range, you need some reasonable outer bounds. And you can do some trickery, like as you put your thumb down, you pull away, you start pulling that fake center towards where your thumb actually is. Like I'm not going to allow my thumb to get too far from that. But you just have to do some tuning for your game for this. The other thing that's kind of missing is on a thumbstick, you get that nice tension you feel as you move your thumb around. And on joysticks, you get that when you feel it from the spring. And so we talked to the Valve guys about it, and they had a really cool trick that they did on their Steam VR controller, where basically you break the trackpad up into these radial and angular quadrants. And every time your thumb crosses one of those radial or angular ones, you play a little light haptic click. And it kind of feels like you're moving a spring around. And that's pretty cool. The problem, though, is that if you want to use that haptic feedback for anything else in your game, you're now drowning it out with a bunch of feedback. And they can be fine if the haptic feedback effects that you want to play are stronger for your game, but in MOS, a lot of them are very light and subtle, and so this was it was confusing. Like, am I moving a spring around, or am I getting feedback from the game's trying to tell me something? So we ended up cutting this, but obviously the idea doesn't work. It's just something to think about. So speaking of that button, so this is the inside of that trackpad. You can actually see one thing that's kind of a cool fun fact. That gray box is the linear something actuator, LRA. Whenever you press and feel a rumble, it feels like it's directly under your thumb, but the rumble's only coming from one spot. I don't know why that works. I think maybe it's because your thumb is like a resonant point or something. I don't know. It's magic. But the other important thing to note is that there's only a single clickable button in the dead center of the pad. And this is a problem for really wide buttons. Because as you're moving your thumb around and clicking near the edge, on some controllers, and they start getting beat up, you start getting unreliable clicks from this. And this was a real problem on some people. They would try to click on like the left or right half of the pad, and then suddenly it's like, this isn't responding. Or worse, it would say, oh, well, I can't tell where your thumb is, but you're kind of clicking, so I'm going to say you're just in the center. And so that's something you have to worry about. Speaking of thumb contact, you don't get like a bounding box for it. You just kind of get the centroid of the meat patch that's touching the thing. And so what it means is you can never actually get to 100% of the pad. And so you need this like dead zone basically. And to be fair, like regular gamepads have an outer dead zone too, but you have to worry about it here as well. And so you think like, if I want my character to like get a 200% run, you can't do that at the edge of the pad. You have to do that some amount inward. And of course that varies from person to person, so you have to pick a variant that kind of feels good. Finally, speaking of other last interesting failure mode, it's a capacitive touch pad. And the way these work, right, is your finger, when it's getting near, it's changing the capacitance of these sensors. And it turns out that humidity can affect that, calibration can affect that. And so sometimes you can get this problem where your thumb lifts off the pad, but it still thinks you're in contact with it. And they have a tool for recalibrating this in Steam VR, but it's not clear to the user sometimes. This is something you have to mention in your notes, like, hey, if you're like getting unreliable clicks, you may want to rerun the calibration. Some people like this didn't help them, and we also added a push to move mode. Rather than a touch to move on the trackpad, you need to press down on the pad and then move it around. That's got its own set of trade-offs, but again, stuff you have to deal with. So lot to worry about there. If you're dealing with a virtual thumbstick. If you're not, hey, great, don't worry about any of that. Separately on Steam VR, you've got to worry about this guy, the Windows Mixed Reality controller. And this is kind of a weird one because it's like half of an Oculus controller and half of a Vive. This is better now than it used to be. There's now an actual like legit plugin for this that's available in Unreal. But in Steam initially, you had to do some trickery inside the plugin to make it so that we would use the thumbstick rather than the trackpad. Because the trackpad, that tiny one, is terrible to use for a thumbstick because it's just too small. But it actually feels better to use if you want it for a left and right button because you get like more clean clicks from it. And I think it's just because if you have a really wide button and one small clicker in the middle of it, it works less reliably. And then, of course, you're going to have to worry about these guys coming out soon, these Knuckles controllers, which are super cool. But in order to use these, you're going to have to take advantage of Steam VR's new button mapping system. There's kind of this legacy input thing that's been running around for a while, but now they're releasing this new API that lets you say, my game defines a set of actions, jump, attack, swing, and I'm not going to say what button they map to. You can provide defaults, but then it's up to the user to customize those things. And so this is coming out kind of hot right now. But definitely start looking into this, especially if you're wanting to support the Knuckles. So that's all I want to say about the Vive. So moving on to the Oculus. This one we were fortunate enough to get some dev kits pretty early on too, after we got the Steam VR dev kits. So we had them for a majority of the development of Moss, and so it was really great for local iteration. And the controls were pretty ideal for the kind of game we were making. We had good, clean, reliable tracking. You had two hands now instead of one, so that was one interesting consideration. You had some good thumbsticks. I like to feel the buttons. So generally, we didn't have any major issues trying to port our game to this one. The one interesting thing, oh yeah, I should also mention too one fun story fact. So I think this may have been the first pair we got. I found out after the fact we weren't supposed to get these. Like we'd taken the game down, and someone gave us a box, and after it's like, no, don't give this to those guys. So thank you, Oculus. Appreciate the early faith. So one fun fact about these controllers, though, is they also have capacitive sensors in the buttons, which allow you to kind of approximate hand pose. This notion of hand presence in VR. And games that are written specifically for the Oculus or have time to implement this, you can do cool like, hey, my thumbs up or down. You can't get like complete 0 to 1, right? But you get some like general hand position stuff off of it. But we kind of had this awkward problem in Moss, like we're porting to multiple platforms. We don't have a ton of time, and so we don't have time to do this level of customization. And so we had to kind of pick the lowest common denominator, which meant having this tracking sphere. And I was super jealous of other consoles that get to kind of really embellish it. I thought Astrobot on the PS4 did a ton of cool stuff. They had this trackpad on the top there, and they had this cool like throwing star mechanic you could do that felt super satisfying. And so they did like everything they could to make that controller feel amazing. And if you have the opportunity to focus on one platform, you kind of get to do this over time. But for us, we got a sphere. And so in this case, our tracking sphere, we also had to do this because on the Dualshock 4, the tracking data is a little less reliable. And so if you have your hand and then you see your hand drifting off, that feels really weird. But if you see a sphere drifting off a little bit because like you lean the control too far, it feels almost more like a playful mouse cursor. And it's not great, but it feels less jarring than it does your hand going away. And so we ended up having to say, like, well, let's pick what seems like we can execute on every platform easily. So something else that was kind of cool that got enabled by the Oculus headset was cinematic capture. So this is actually a shot from E3 2017, I forget. And so it's our trailer playing on stage. This was insane. That Sony gave us the opportunity to do that. But how do we get to making that trailer? And then actually I'll show you there's some clips from the trailer here just because that's the end product. This is kind of a trimmed down version of it. You see, it's you looking down in the water, and then you look up, like, oh, it's a Killer Mouse character. Somebody's pan across the lake. Oh, look, his hand swept something. Oh, is that neat? It's interacting, it's VR. Oh, he's pulling up in a gate. Oh, hey, the player's pulling something. That's cool too. What's he interacting with? He's up in combat, yay! So, what I want to call out in that trailer is it was kind of an interesting blend between traditional camera cuts and like so how do you get that? It's a goddamn nightmare. And I'll explain why. So at first we're like, well, it's really hard to hold a headset. And it's hard, it turns out when you put a headset on and say, hold still, look at something, you can't. Your head and neck jitter a surprising amount, and your brain and your eyes compensate for it. So your head is garbage for trying to do stable tracking. So like maybe a fake head, maybe a cosmetologist. This is literally a $30 cosmetology head we got off Amazon. And that helped a little bit, but it was still awkward to get clean. Like, it still wasn't as stabilized. And it scared the hell out of our coworkers, and they were surprised by him around the corner. So then we tried, Vive had the tracking puck. One of the weird things with the tracking puck is that you don't have a forward arrow. Why they didn't put that, I don't know. So that's the googly eyes are for, that's forward. So our capture station was this jumble of wires here. You see our two lighthouses on either side. One interesting side effect, though, if you're doing this, I'm not saying that the puck can't work. It totally can, but as you're walking on the ground, any minor vibration that you have as you move will jiggle those lighthouses, and you actually won't notice it when you're wearing it, but you'll totally see it and you're trying to capture a trailer. So either have really good buffers, mats or something on the tripod, or mount it from the ceiling, something. We ended up giving up on this, and what we ended up doing, this is why it's in the Oculus section, was we mounted an Oculus controller to this motion stabilizer rig, and then had a debug option again, so this is your head. And then, so we only had that Ronin's like a super high-end like motion stabilizer. We only got that for a day. We're having this guy, Michael, who's awesome, who does game trailers professionally, came and helped us out. We bought a little $300 hand stabilizer that worked just as well for our needs. And you can see them doing this shot of like trying to slowly pan, and then Lincoln, our PA guy's trying to control quill with a thumbstick. Even with all this, it's still a nightmare, because shooting trailers in general is hard, because you're trying to capture a game at a time when everyone's trying to close everything down. It's hard to get just the right shot. It's harder in VR now because you're trying to make this thing feel like it's head motion, but cleaner than head motion, and trying to get a good direct shot. It's just painful. I have no positive stories to tell you there, except brace yourself. If you don't have a hat, buy one so you can hang on to it. Also, while you're recording the game, it's really useful to have a bunch of really common debug switches for enabling or disabling features. Like, for example, when you lean in close to Quill, she'll look back at you, and it's adorable. Except when you're trying to get a good shot. You're like, God damn it, Quill, you just ruined my shot. Get that shit off. So you want a button to turn that off. Or like, I don't want music to play, or whatever. And you can have console commands, but if you have somebody who's there trying to just get a shot, he's got a 6-hour window to do it, make that as easy as possible for him. So we made this little plugin in our editor for that. Similarly, trying to get screenshots can be kind of a pain. We want to get a couple like great action shots. And so here's one of our artists suffering, trying to get like the ideal shot, grabbing the thing posted in the environment and trying to hit pause break at the right time. It was a nightmare. So you're like, okay, well, cool, I got the pose, but now the camera angle's not right. And so we ended up adding this camera mode in game where you can pause the game at a point, and then you can hide the menu, and then you can reposition your head wherever you want to get like the perfect shot. So the last thing I want to talk about on the Oculus section, specifically cinematic capture. I don't know if you guys remember this weird period of 6 months where it was like really expensive to get a GPU. This was awful for us because this is when we were trying to shoot our trailer. And so it's like, we're in a studio, we can't afford to buy a freaking graphics card anymore because it got way expensive. This isn't a problem for a big studio. For us, this is kind of a problem, so we're having to like multitask machines. So I pointed out this machine before. This guy was doing triple duty for us. During the day, it was where our cinematic guy was trying to record the trailer. In the evening is when we had a contract tester helping do testing, and then at night it was our build machine. One problem with doing this is that you end up having to install software in kind of a hurry, and sometimes you get stuff you don't intend. So we got a cryptocurrency miner installed from a piece of video editing software. When they were like, man, why the hell is it taking so long for our builds to run? We look at there and we're like, what is this service? Oh, damn it. So point being, if you're indie, I totally get trying to be scrappy and trying to reuse hardware, that's fine. Just make sure you run good antivirus software. Be careful about that. Ideally, you separate these things. And in general, it's a hassle trying to set up all the hardware for cinematic capture. Like, if you can, please try to make that a separate machine, because it was a nightmare for us trying to juggle those hardware and having to reconfigure everything every day. So that's the last of the Oculus section. Moving on to the Quest, our fourth and final one. So this is kind of weird for me to talk about because we're literally in the act of trying to port this right now. And because it's not out yet, there's a set of things I probably can't talk about. So what I would like to talk about is some interesting, just general tracking considerations and general content things that we had to worry about importing this, because this is, as has been stated, a mobile device. It's a very powerful mobile device, but it's a mobile device. It's an Android under there. What that means is that you're going to have to optimize your content in ways that maybe you didn't have to do before. And not in bad ways, just you have to rethink about how you've loaded some of the stuff. You've got to be lazy on the PC. The other thing I want to point out too is that, for those who aren't familiar, this is a really amazing device because it doesn't require tracking cameras anymore. The cameras are built on the headset. They have 4 cameras there. It's what's called inside-out tracking. And so suddenly it's incredibly free to have cables off the thing. It's all running and self-contained. But because it is tracking from that point of view, it's tracking these controllers, which look very similar to the Oculus controllers, but they have this important difference with the rings are over top now. It's because those cameras need to see your hands. And that's cool, but it means that there's some new interesting occlusion situations where if you put one hand in front of the other too close, if you're doing a two-handed weapon, suddenly your front hand can block your back hand from the point of view. If your hands are too close to your face, then you may get into a dead zone. If you're going way behind you, Gabor Sauer at Oculus Connect 5 gave this really great talk kind of outlining his concerns, and he had this nice diagram, so I stole it. Showing like, hey, generally you have this great tracking region, but if you decide I want to go way back behind my head, right, now you're out of view of those cameras. For Moss, this wasn't a problem, right? And so it just means you have to be mindful of those tracking regions and think about that in your game design. So the other interesting thing, while technically speaking, this headset does have standard audio jack, it has these really interesting built-in headphones. And one thing I didn't kind of anticipate with these is that when you wear them, you can hear it, of course, but they're kind of designed to let audio bleed a little bit out. And so somebody can be sitting next to you and experiencing the game just through audio. And this is surprisingly cool. It's been really interesting to sit down and when someone's playing the game, I know exactly what section of the game. I remember that music beat there. I know which part. You're about to start that part of the boss battle. That's really cool. And it's sort of neat to have this like audio presence when you're nearby somebody. I had a similar feeling watching my wife play the latest Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and I really loved the sound design of that game, and just hearing like all the ambient sounds in the background was really cool. So I know somebody's going to be an unsung hero here, but I think it's kind of cool that they designed the headphones in this way. But I do want to point out the acoustic properties of this are a little bit different than the headphone jack, and so you may want to take the time, depending on your game, to make a different mix. You can detect whether headphones are plugged in or not, so something to think about. Gabor also gave this interesting talk about, and this is kind of standard anti-porting to consoles or the low-end devices, about being efficient with your content. And he talked about what's called Alicean textures. If you've got like 30 objects that are all drawing independently, it's like maybe if they're all static and they're all in the same environment, mush them together. And that's sort of easier said than done. It's like, oh yeah, of course, these are all in the same room, just put them all in one texture. But like actually doing that can take some work. So one of the first big thing we did was said, well, we still want to preserve the quality of the content that we made on the PC. And so we have this what we call room directory system. For every puzzle room in the game, these are all of the levels that get loaded. But for the first time, we needed to actually make special content specifically for the Quest. And so we had to add support for, like, hey, is this on a mobile device or not? And it sort of seems obvious in retrospect, but we hadn't considered that initially. And so it took a little bit of extra work to make that work. So I had to think about, like, hey, you might need switches for doing different content on different platforms. And Unreal has this for some things, but it doesn't have this for levels, so we had to kind of write this ourselves. Finally, as was alluded to earlier, if you've got a bunch of individual actors in this space here, we originally had 644 actors for this intro room. Each one of those is its own draw call. You want to be between 150 and 200 draw calls, so you want to smush those together. And Unreal already has tools, and I'm sure Unity does too, for smushing together actors. And so here we got that down to 17, which is great. So some spaces this is easy to do. But what if you have a really complicated environment like the library at the very beginning of our game? I don't know how many UWM we have here. This is actually modeled after the Suzzallo library, which is a beautiful space, but lots of geo. We did a ton of optimization, and it's a slightly different camera angle, but this is the mobile version of it. Hopefully, you can't tell too much of a difference beyond like changing the camera angle. Some other game objects missing because I screwed up when I captured the picture. But generally, the background looks basically the same. So this is the wireframe of the original space. You can see there's a lot of detail in the space. We made almost no effort to optimize that initially. All these individual draw calls for the tables and stuff. So on the mobile version, we merged a bunch of these actors, but you notice that background looks like it's a skybox, like a spherical skybox there. And that's the first easy thing to do. It's like, oh, I'm just going to bake all the background to a sphere. And that works if your head's in one position. But the moment you sidestep, you don't get the parallax you expect. So we still wanted something like this, but we had to do some trickery. So you'll notice, and now in the optimized version, it looks basically the same, but it gets a little bit more smeared to the edge. Like, what's going on there? So we pulled this library geo into this really awesome tool called Houdini. Houdini is a tool I had only heard about for effects, but we were very fortunate to work with this awesome tech artist. Tyler Walters has been amazing. And he loves Houdini, is a master at it, and it's really more of a general content processing pipeline. So he loaded the library in there, and they took that sphere near where the place position was and inflated it so that it lined up roughly with the library. So you have the shell now, and then you can bake all that texture data to it. And so what you end up getting, this is the wireframe view of it, all that detail gets concentrated down there, but you still get kind of that correct looking parallax, which is super cool. He was going to try to do some similar trickery in the intra-library space for merging and outside textures where based on a sphere, he'd say like try to put most of the detail nearby and kind of lower the detail of both the polygons and also the textures, so I try to pack more texture detail closer by. And this was cool and did technically work, but he couldn't quite get it working because we had like 86 rooms, I think, to port. I just didn't have time to make this approach work, so he ended up doing some simpler stuff. But I do believe in the long term this can work. And I don't know. I think this is true for Unity as well. But Unreal has a Houdini plugin that makes it really easy to migrate stuff back and forth. If you set up some common pipelines for this. I'm totally out of my element talking this, so if anybody who's a Houdini expert hears me say something wrong, I'm sorry. Another fun facet on mobile, there's a physics engine in Unreal, and they have this destructible tool called Apex that lets you blow up stuff, which is cool, not on mobile. So in Houdini, Tyler was able to take these meshes and then break them up into fragments, and then bake that fragment information to, I think he had a material basically, so that like making it explode was purely driven as a material parameter rather than any kind of physics thing. So that was blown up the same way, but you didn't really notice anyway. This is way cheaper. Moving on to this amazing tool called RenderDoc that we've used on the PC before, and it's like, if you want to go really, really crazy deep on like understanding in a given frame what has happened. And there's a lot of cool bells and whistles in this thing. I think for me, the most useful thing that this provides when you get a snapshot is just like, hey, I want to cycle through everything that's getting drawn and like picking up stuff that's unexpected. Like, more often than not, I'd be like, oh, hey, like, there's this chunk of geo in the background that I never intended to show up in the first place. And there's like way more complicated stuff you can get in there, but it's a super powerful tool. And Oculus has done a bunch of work to make this work on the Quest, which is amazing, because for us, we didn't have it on the PS4, and we use it a ton on the PC, so to have it on the Quest has been super, super helpful. And then finally, if you're playtesting, as of right now, please correct me if I'm wrong, there's not a good way to stream the video feed from the Oculus headset onto TV, which is really important for playtesting. But there's this, because it's an Android device, there's already this other pre-existing tool called Visor that does that for you. So we were using this for playtesting. So definitely recommend checking that one out if you can. There's a free version of it that streams a kind of low quality video, but it works. And then if you pay like $30 for a year or whatever, it's nice quality. So definitely worth checking that out. So that was a lot of content to cover. This is kind of a collection of all of the GDC talks that we gave over the last 2 years. This year we gave the two audio talk, Design Before Sound, and then our composer Jason Graves gave a really great talk on the work he did for that. Corinne gave her talk. She's going to be giving, as mentioned earlier, over at UW. And then I gave my interaction design talk with Josh, and then the year prior I gave one on how we did character interaction stuff, and our animator Rick gave one on animation. So go to GDC Vault. I think most of these are freely available. Forgive me if they're not. So if you search for either Polyarc or Moss on the Vault, then you should be able to find all these. So there's a lot of material to cover. If you have any questions, and to introduce, I just came back from Japan for 2 weeks, and I got this this little fridge magnet that is a Tamago, fake Tamago. So anybody who comes and asks a question first, it's yours if you want a fridge magnet.
That was a great talk. We're currently trying to port a game that we started with the Oculus Go, and we're going to the Steam and Oculus Rift and all those. It's kind of different starting with Android and then going to plenty of polygons to use. So I guess I think at the end when you mentioned the Oculus Quest version, it became sort of clear that you have one project that you have then modified every time you add a platform, so you've kept it all kind of together, right?
Yes.
Okay. I guess that's maybe not be a question. I might have to get this back.
Elaborate.
Because yeah, we were always wondering whether we had to fracture off our different platforms, and then how do you manage your updates and how do you do your patches and stuff like that.
Great question. Yeah, so this is a concept. I don't have a good answer for when is the right or not right time. It's been our opinion that because we're small, we were just scared about migrating content across fractured versions, so we tried really hard to keep them all together. The Quest was the first time that we had to add support for, supporting different versions of the content in the same project, and that's hard for packaging too, right? Because when you package a game, you're like, this is the final asset that goes out, and I want to make sure the PC assets don't go with that. And there was not a great way to do that in Unreal. You can do it with other kinds of things, but like for levels, we had to do some custom work to make that happen. Whereas we could have just said like, yeah, forget it, we're just gonna make another branch, and like this is never gonna come back. And so you have to decide as a studio, like, do we either want to pay the tax of manually merging changes over, how often you're gonna update? We've also had this mandate that every time we do a release, or every time we do an update, we're gonna do it on every platform, which is hard. And not even everyone wants to do that. So it's sort of a case-by-case basis, but that is a real challenge.
So you are in the same project?
Yep, the same project.
Does your Oculus plugin, your VR plugin, and your Sony plugin, and your...
Yes, although,
each other?
no, so in Unreal, where you can say like, this plugin is not enabled on this platform, you can whitelist one, so we definitely had to do that. That was huge on Android. We had a ton of plugins we didn't realize. Like our game execute was like 800 megs, and then we turned off a bunch of stuff that's on by default, and it dropped it to like 60 megabytes or 70 megabytes. Like, what the hell, Unreal? It's not on by default, but you don't notice on PC.